This is our presentation on the Toulmin model and analyzing assumptions by Andres, Saloni, Jin, and me, Nathan. Quick fun fact. Born on March 25th, 1922 in London was Stephen Toulmin, a British philosopher, author, and educator who was influenced by Ludwig Wittgenstein to study the analysis of moral reasoning. Wittgenstein's influence led Toulmin to developing the Toulmin model. He unfortunately did pass away on December 4th, 2009 in Los Angeles. Pretty recent. This is the Toulmin model. The model is basically a breakdown of an argument into six components: evidence, assumption, backing, qualifier, claim, and reservation. Its purpose is to be a guide and be used as a framework to test an argument's validity. Your Toulmin analysis should follow the form below the model.
So looking back or remembering the previous slide, we were shown six different parts to the Toulmin model and how they individually have their own significant role in this argument, but I'm going to be talking about the very first two, which consists of your evidence and assumption, and then slightly go over the claim as it's included in the model at the very end of the slide. So starting off with your evidence, this is basically your support that brings facts or any specific details to the table for your argument, and this is commonly referred to as your grounds. And you want to try to start off with your evidence. Actually, no, scratch that. You have to, or you always want to start off with your evidence at the very beginning when using the Toulmin model. So then after that, you would want to have the assumption ready to go, like quick, next. And this is sometimes referred to as warrant, but you don't have to worry much about it. But the assumption is basically a bridge between your evidence and claim. So looking at the model below, we have evidence on the left side, which is in blue, and the claim on the very far right, which is in yellow. Your claim being that dogs are nearby, and your evidence would be you can hear barking. And as I talked earlier, or just previously, that the assumption is that bridge. Your assumption would be that dogs are animals that bark. So looking at the model, we can see that there's a bridge forming with the assumption, having the evidence as the very first thing to go.
After the claim and assumption comes the backing and qualifier. The backing is tied to the assumption because it acts as a justification for it. However, you should note that there are different kinds of backing. It is dependent on the field to which the question at issue belongs. For example, your backing for an ethical justification will be completely different compared to a backing for a legal justification. With the assumption normally being implied, there needs to be some sort of evidence that will attract readers to the possibility of one's assumption being reasonable, thus further supporting one's claim. Sometimes it can also be a completely separate piece of evidence that just adds on to the support of the assumption because the assumption itself lacks authority. After the backing comes the qualifier. The qualifier kind of opens up the possibility of alternative or counter instances that may show that the claim may not be true in all circumstances. In other words, it kind of quote unquote opens the door for reservation. The writer may do this by using words like presumably and possibly to display uncertainty. To help you guys further understand both backing and qualifier, I have provided an example on the right side. I have boldfaced and underlined the backing and qualifier in this phrase. The backing would be where it states on account of being available locally. This would be the backing because it is answering quote unquote a question that can provide further information that enhances the easy accessibility of the hearing aid, which is obviously beneficial to the claim. The qualifier would be where it states probably, because that is where the writer is creating space for the reservation and displaying their uncertainty.
The claim and reservation portions of the Toulmin model should give your argument and give inspiration for rebuttals to the audience. The claim is simply your claim. One thing to keep in mind is that the claim is dependent on the assumptions or warrants you made. The speaker and the audience need to share the same assumptions to reach the same claim, meaning that if you, as the speaker, can't convince or teach the audience about your assumptions, it would be difficult to convince them with your claim. Another way to put this is that a good claim is dependent on the speaker making good assumptions. The reservation is basically the speaker's rebuttal of his or her own claim. The main point of the reservation is to inspire rebuttals. This part is one of the most important parts of the Toulmin model because if the speaker's self-rebuttal is too strong, the audience may not be convinced of your argument. If the speaker's self-rebuttal is too weak, the audience may think that the speaker is being cheap by dismissing rebuttals with a weak one. Therefore, the speaker must try not to give a too strong or too weak of a self-rebuttal to focus on inspiring rebuttals from the audience instead. The reservation can be considered a second part for the qualifier because the reservation shows the audience why the speaker had uncertainty about his or her claim.
Okay, so let's move on to analyzing assumptions. The Toulmin model shows us that assumptions are really the link between a claim and the evidence used to support it. And we say assumptions because any argument is based on numerous assumptions made by the author. And if the audience shares the assumption and agrees with it, then there's more of a chance that the audience is going to agree with the claim as well. Sometimes in the argument, claims are really implicit in the beginning, but more explicit later on. And by using the Toulmin model, you can discover the assumptions being made, especially if the claim is implicit. And if you're ever asked to analyze an argument and either support it or challenge it, then it's best to look for vulnerabilities in the assumptions first. And this is why shared assumptions should be used, because if the assumption isn't shared by the audience, then it just becomes another claim that you would need to support and provide more evidence for. So let's look at this example down here. The last part that we see here, it talks about increased instructional time being responsible for increased test scores. And this is an assumption made by the author, and it's debatable, and you can either agree with it or disagree with it by saying increased instructional time doesn't correlate at all with increased test scores. And if the audience might not agree with the assumption, then it's more likely that they're not going to agree with the claim either, and Zakaria would need to provide extra evidence to support the assumption, which just became a claim. So this would be seen as a vulnerability in the argument being made.
Now we'll be going into the activity. For the activity, there is a short phrase at the bottom left of the slide. We want you to take the next minute and 30 seconds to identify each part of the Toulmin model being utilized in the phrase. Your time starts now. And your time is up now. Here are the answers to the activity. Check to see if you got the answers correct. And this concludes our presentation. Thank you.